Deployment and Scalability Microsoft SharePoint Server 2010 Deployment Process Module 1. At the end of this module, you'll be able to identify the search team, list the hardware and software requirements, and describe the installation and configuration process. Before you begin planning the features and deployment of search for Microsoft SharePoint Server 2010, you should understand the role of the search planning team. Involve the following people in the planning for search: the content architects, site collection administrators, IT administrators, and security architects. As with any large IT project, you should have a designated project manager who defines and drives the planning and implementation of your search implementation. Content architects manage large content sets that include network file shares, websites, Lotus Notes databases, and custom data sources accessed through third-party connectors. Content architects understand the high-level content needs of the organization and what information is important for users across their content sets. Site collection administrators manage the specific content needs of a single site collection, often scoped to a division or a specific organizational purpose or product line. Search administrators manage the end-user experience. This includes defining keywords, best bets, and scopes. Search administrators must plan the end-user search experience at the site collection level, but they can also plan it for individual sites. IT administrators plan architecture topology and operations details for one or more server farms in the organization, based on the content needs identified by others. Typically, IT administrators are not concerned with content except as it affects IT operations such as availability, reliability, and capacity planning. Security architects ensure compliance to established security and privacy policies. Security architects should be involved on all phases of planning, testing, and deployment. The search planning process encompasses the following major steps. You identify the content managed by administrators and site collection administrators during content planning, and content needs are reflected in the taxonomy development of the organization. Site collection administrators and administrators consider the search capabilities they want to implement to meet the content needs, and communicate the required capabilities to IT administrators and application administrators. The high priority content needs are addressed in IT planning and deployed in pilot deployment, and then other content needs are met in successive waves of planning. When there is sufficient content and the search capabilities for that content are available, the initial deployment is made available to the entire organization. Depending upon the amount of content and level of planning detail, planning and implementation continue after deployment. To deploy the search service application, each of the types of administrators listed in the previous section are required. To perform regularly scheduled operations, you will need an administrator and a site collection administrator at a minimum. The same people who are on the search planning team might also be involved in the deployment and operations phases, but this can vary between organizations. The recommended hardware depends upon what you are trying to deploy. For specific information about overall minimum and recommended system requirements, see the document Determine Hardware and Software Requirements available at technet.microsoft.com. Software requirements. At a minimum, you will need Windows Server 2008 64-bit edition, either Standard, Enterprise, or Data Center. Follow the links displayed here for software requirements and also for software prerequisites. Database requirements. You'll need one of the following: the 64-bit edition of Microsoft SQL Server 2005 with Service Pack 3, with cumulative update package 3 for SQL Server 2005 Service Pack 3, or the 64-bit edition of Microsoft SQL Server 2008 with Service Pack 1, cumulative update 2 with cumulative update package 2 for SQL Server 2008 Service Pack 1. Deployment stage and environment. Over the course of planning, developing, testing, and rolling out SharePoint 2010 products, you'll perform several deployments, such as an initial proof of concept, a pilot or pre-production environment, and your production environment. If you're using the same hardware to move through these phases, be sure to reformat each computer between each phase. Always use development best practices for managing your solutions through their lifecycle. For more information, see the Application Lifecycle Management Resource Center on MSDN. Planning. Before you can deploy, you must plan the solution you want to deploy. After the planning stage, you move through the deployment stages, updating and revising your plans as you test each stage. Initially, you want to perform a business analysis, determine goals and objectives, and determine infrastructure requirements. Your ultimate goal is to develop a solution plan and a topology and resource requirements. Development. Development environments exist throughout the lifecycle of a project. The initial development of the solution is followed by testing and refining the solution. Initially, you want to deploy the environment computers or farm, develop a solution, test and evaluate the solution, and then refine the solution. And the overall final objective is to actually have a solution. The overall objective is to develop a solution. The topology that you might use at this stage varies from ranging from solution development computers running with Windows 7 to large-scale pilot and UTA environments. Development. Initially, you want to deploy the development computers or farm, develop the solution, test and evaluate the solution, and then refine the solution. The overall goal is to develop a solution. A proof of concept environment helps you determine whether the solution meets the business needs and to determine the appropriate infrastructure plan. Proof of concepts are often created during evaluation phase to test the product or solution. A proof of concept can be hosted on a development environment or on a small-scale production computer. Sometimes proof of concepts moves through several stages in a continuous development. Typically, you'd use a single server or a small farm for this step. The steps involved include to deploy the farm, deploy the solution, collect benchmark data, evaluate proof of concept, refine goals and infrastructure requirements. The ultimate goal is to update the solution plan and update the solution topology and resource requirements. Pilots are used to test solution readiness. There's no real data, just functionality testing. A pilot can also be used to test for production characteristics such as real data and actual work, which is recommended. Typically, you would have a limited number of users which have access to the environment to test the functionality and performance of the solution and infrastructure. At this stage, you will typically deploy the pilot farm, deploy the solution, collect benchmark data, evaluate the pilot, then refine the goals and infrastructure requirements, and then finally determine operations plan. Again, the ultimate goal is to update a solution plan, create an updated topology and resource requirements, and develop an operations plan. The topologies at this stage will vary depending upon the type of solution you're working on, the number of pilot users, and the type of testing desired. Pilot environments are generally scaled down, representative versions of a planned production environment. The topology can be small scale, as shown here, where each server role is on its own server, or medium scale, which is closer to a planned production environment. A successful pilot project includes getting executive responses of the project, establishing a clear schedule, making the environment production class but small scale, limit the pilot testing to no more than a few hundred users, establish an appropriate service level agreement, treat the pilot as business critical, not as a lab environment. In other words, if the environment were to go offline, it would stop work for the pilot users. Test operational tasks such as backup and recovery and health monitoring, as well as solution elements. And finally, perform surveys of users to get feedback on the solution and the operation of the environment. The user acceptance test is a pre-production environment used for testing solutions against a subset of or a complete copy of production data. It is also used for validating backups and operational procedures. The topology at this stage should be similar to a production environment. Shown in the example here is a medium scale topology. Testers at this stage will ensure that all solution elements function as expected in the network and security conditions that match the conditions of the production environment. Also at this stage, long-term availability should also be tested. Finally, the production environment. This is a live environment that your user will interact with. It is business critical and appropriate service level agreements are in place. At this stage, long-term availability is expected, and it should be a stable environment. You should have a full service level agreement for users, appropriate to the solution and business requirements of your organization or group that you are working for. Again, topology depends upon the environment. For production environments, topologies typically reflect the solution and performance characteristics that were validated in pre-production environments. Shown in this example is a large-scale topology. Multiple servers for each server role exist and may include multiple farms for specific purposes. Before you implement a SharePoint solution, you need to prepare the servers. You need to configure the domain controller, set up and configure farm accounts, and configure directory synchronization. Set up any database servers. Set up and harden database servers. Install the QBuilder service if required, and install the SQL analysis service if required. Also, pre-install any databases or create any databases. For application servers, you need to verify hardware requirements, install and harden Windows Server 2008 or Windows Server 2008 R2, install and configure network security protocols, and then finally install and configure and harden prerequisites. For the web servers or the web front end, again verify hardware requirements, install Windows Server 2008 or Windows Server 2008 R2, install and configure network security protocols, install and configure and harden prerequisites, configure elements required for authentication, and if upgrading, run the pre-upgrade checker. Install and build a farm. In this phase, you install the Microsoft SharePoint Server 2010 and assign roles to each server. You also create a configuration database and the SharePoint Central Administration site. At this stage, you will also install any additional components. If using IRM, install the Rights Management Server client. If you're using Queue Builder Service, you will need to install Decision Support Objects and create an OLAP administrator account. For the database servers, if you're not pre-installing databases, the configuration database is created when you run SharePoint Products 2010 Configuration Wizard. All other databases are created when you create the service applications and web applications that require them. For the application servers, initially install any additional components needed, then run setup on the application servers in the farm, and then run the config wizard to create the farm and SharePoint Central Admin. On the web servers, run setup on the web servers in the farm, install language packs on all web servers in the farm, then run the configuration wizard on the web servers to join the farm, and then finally on the application servers, run the config wizard on the remaining application servers to join the farm. Finally, you need to configure settings, services, solutions, and sites. In this phase, you will prepare the farm to host your site content, configure global settings, create service applications, deploy customizations, and finally create and populate the sites. You perform configuration steps by using the SharePoint Central Administration website or the Windows PowerShell. Configuration steps are not isolated to a specific tier in the server infrastructure. Initially, you'll set up the settings, configure outgoing emails, configure mobile access, configure incoming emails, configure diagnostic logging and settings and health analyzer, configure usage and health data collection, add antivirus protection, add monitoring, SCOM, and finally throttling. At the services stage, you will create service applications, create proxy groups if necessary, and enable specific services on the application servers. Next, you will deploy the solutions, create sandbox solutions, deploy custom solutions, deploy custom site definitions, and deploy custom features. Finally, you will create web applications and sites. Create web applications, configure web application settings, configure authentication, configure quotas, configure alternative access mappings, and then create a site collection, and then finally configure application pool recycling, if necessary. In this module, you'll have learned to identify the search team, list the hardware and software requirements, and describe the installation and configuration process.